Hello, welcome to History Chats this afternoon. There we go. Yeah, we're continuing our journey across Marathon County to look at some places you should know this afternoon. This brings us to Granite Heights, which is maybe not as familiar as some of the other places that we visited this month, but has an interesting story. And I'm going to turn it over to Gary now, and he will walk us through some of the history of this community.
Thank you, Ben. Good day, everyone. So today we're talking about Granite Heights, and you'll say, what? You sort of a question arises, what about Granite Heights? Granite Heights has some unique stories to it. Somewhat they are connected, and sometimes they're not connected. But I think I'm going to try to present to you a variety of different stories with regard to Granite Heights, all speaking to this little part of Marathon County up the Wisconsin River from Wausau. So we start with one of the more notable things that we associate with Granite Heights, and that's granite. Granite was a product of this area, and that's a strong history that we'll talk a little bit about today. But granite is a reason why this place was called Granite Heights. We don't know exactly how it came to be called. Well, we do know how it came to be called Granite Heights, but we don't know exactly how it came to be that way. But anyways, let's start with where is Granite Heights? Well, it's up the Wisconsin River from, like I said, from Wausau, a little north of what we call Brokaw, up off of Highway County Road W, and you take a little bit of a left-hand turn on Granite Heights Road, and eventually you'll come into this community. This still community, it's still on the map. So it's worth talking about. It's worth describing a little bit of its history today. But the uniqueness about Granite Heights, I think, is the terrain, is some of the geography, the geology of, and I'm not going to get into the geology of how this granite came to be in this part of Marathon County. But the big part of this story is the geology of granite in Marathon County. That's another story. But anyways, here's an early topographical map of Granite Heights, surrounded by, at that time, the town of Texas and a variety of other things surrounding Granite Heights. So if we go back, the story really starts with an L.S. Cohn owning some land along the Wisconsin River in the town of Texas. Basically, it's those sections in the town of Texas and somewhat across the river into the town of Maine. Mr. Cohn owned some land, and one day he was walking and he stumbled across some outcroppings of some rock, and this rock turned out to be granite. And Mr. Cohn found that this was could be shaped into some very nice polished stone, but it also could be used as a great building material, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But Mr. Cohn originally was there in the 1870s when this was started. He took over there was an earlier growth than Peter's Granite Company up in that area, in Granite Heights. Mr. Cohn and Mr. Robinson in Granite Heights took over the business in 1886, and from there it was basically used as building materials. And also, for instance, as the statue of the Civil War that we now see at the grounds of the courthouse was made from this very granite. And this was one of the early manifestations of Marathon County granite in this statue of the Civil War, the GAR memorial on the courthouse grounds. It was also used as a building material. This is a colorized version, but the old Marathon County Bank on the corner of McClellan and 3rd Street was facaded in Marathon County red granite. The courthouse, another building was the Marathon County courthouse, and a variety of other buildings, the Plummer Mansion, a variety of other buildings in Marathon County was in the early days using Marathon County granite. But then as reported in the 1893, is becoming more and more evident every day that the granite is the granite manufactured at Granite Heights in Marathon County. Mr. Cohn, again referring to Mr. Cohn, informs that the paper that this granite took the premium at the World's Fair, both for polished and rough granite, for building material. So it was being, early on in the 1880s, 1890s, it was also being recognized around the United States that this was a unique building material, and it was starting to put Marathon County on the map as far as what a natural resource found here in Marathon County. So let's take a look. One of the other unique stories, of course, is, and what we're talking about today, is Granite Heights. Granite Heights is still there, doesn't look today like it did back then. Back then it had a railroad station and it had a quarry, and it was a busy little community with a school and church. This was 1900. Again, a very active place in Marathon County. Another story that weaves through the history of Granite Heights is the coming of Anderson Brothers and Johnson into this territory. This is an 1905. The larger company of Andersons and Johnsons were there already in the 1880s. We'll talk about them in a few minutes, but in 1905, it really there was a consolidation of the company itself, and at that time in 1905, it came to be called Anderson Brothers and Johnson, and I'll talk about the players soon. Because eventually it involved the three players, Gustav Anderson, Charles Johnson, and William Anderson. And another intriguing story in this, which I'll repeat in a few minutes, is that all of these three came from Sweden. Born in around 1860s, came to America when they were very young, 21, I think, 21 years old. These three sort of were what would become the major founders of what came to be this major Anderson Brothers and Johnson Granite Works. But coming from Sweden, young people, somehow they had a notion of coming in their late teens and early 20s to Wausau, Wisconsin, or to Granite Heights, because they came to Granite Heights in the 1880s. And as we saw before, it was still under different ownership. But then after the depression of the depression of the early 1890s, when Cohn and Robinson went out of business, then the Andersons and Johnsons came in, took over the quarrying of granite at Granite Heights, and eventually, like I said before, in 1905, it sort of consolidated into these three people that would run the business for a very long time. But they were all coming from Sweden, all found their way to Granite Heights to work in the granite quarries and the factories. An unknown story of really what compelled them to come here. Was it something in Sweden? Were they familiar with granite? We don't quite know that story, but here they were, and their company in 1905, like I said, became Anderson Brothers and Johnson, the major granite factory in Granite Heights. And in Granite Heights, we had the quarry, we had the factory. This is what that quarry may have looked like. They quarried this red granite, this spectacular red granite, especially when it was polished, and turned this into around the world, really put Granite Heights as well as Marathon County on the map for this fine, very fine granite. These quarries were, this is the quarry at Granite Heights. There was a quarry there, as well as the factory, which we see in the background. The factory would take the rough stone and polish it and make it into the stones that we would be seeing for a long time. This is a picture that ran in the Herald, marking the Granite Heights, but again, another picture of Granite Heights and the factories there in Granite Heights. One of the unique stories with regard to granite manufacturing, granite quarrying in Marathon County, up in that part of the town of Maine and the town of Texas, was that there was also quarries across the river in the town of Maine, and they would ferry these boats of granite across the Wisconsin River to their major factory in Granite Heights. So this was a picture of the way that came across the Wisconsin River to the factories in Granite Heights. But again, as the Anderson brothers and other granite companies started to come into the fold of Marathon County, the major product of a lot of these would be the markers, the gravestones in dotting the cemeteries of Marathon County. You go to Pine Grove, Restlawn, the many cemeteries throughout Marathon County, and a good chance that majority of this would be this red granite that would be coming out of the Granite Heights area of the town of Texas and the town of Maine. And it wasn't just with regard to the quarrying of red granite. It wasn't just in Granite Heights, but there were quarries throughout Marathon County, especially along this what seems to be a vein of red granite, starting over in the town on your left. The quarries, the Prain quarries, a variety of other quarries up in the town of Maine, and this vein coming through Granite Heights and then winding its way through the town of Texas. Granite Road, a lot of granite was being quarried in this part of the town of Texas. And then again, a little bit of a story saying the value of the local product first recognized by Mr. Cohn, Anderson Brothers, and Johnson First. So again, the continuing acknowledgement in the local newspapers with regard to the use of granite at this point in time being used as memorial markers for the local citizens. And then an earlier story, I know I seem to be backing up back and forth, but again, in 1910, the story in the pilot recognized the great value of and the history of the founding of granite and its being used and how it was being used in Marathon County. The first, it talks about Mr. Cohn, and then it goes on to talk about the great value that this is being used for one of the natural resources that really put Marathon County on the map, and a very valuable resource, considering the employment that was put to use not only in Granite Heights, but in the quarrying throughout northern Marathon County. It was a great resource for Marathon County at that time. Another story that I want to pick up on is the Swedish settlement in Granite Heights. This article just sort of 1909 just sort of came at me, and then it was just an article that Mr. Ole Carlson of Granite Heights purchased transportation to this country from this place in Sweden for his brother. So he purchased the ticket, and he was bringing his brother back to Granite Heights. It was mentioned that Mr. Carlson is a stonecutter employed by Anderson Brothers and Johnson in Granite Heights. This was in 1909. So again, Anderson Brothers, stonecutter, quarrying, as well as polishing it, all of this in their factory in Granite Heights. And a great story of the Swedish element. If you look at the census of 1900, 1910, you see that a lot of Swedes, besides the Johnson, the Andersons, found their way to Granite Heights to work in the granite factory. I show this picture of so what was Granite Heights like? This is 1922 Granite Heights from the city directory. It just speaks a little bit, their post office, a population of 40. That was pretty much the population of Granite Heights for a long time through at least now through the 20s and 30s. I think it may have been more in the early days when Anderson Brothers and Johnson factory was there. We'll talk about that in a minute. But again, Granite Heights always there. It's still there. Community, a little bit of a community sitting along the Wisconsin River up north of Wausau. But in 1912, especially after some flooding in 1912, in 1913, the granite works of Anderson Brothers and Johnson at the Heights is now a sort of thing for Wausau. So they moved their factory, their polishing, their cutting, all their work that made markers to their facility here in Wausau. And then it goes on to say this institution now keeps about 70 men busy with its enlarged and more modern plant. So they came to Wausau with their factory. This was their factory on the southeast side of Wausau between the two railroad tracks. They mostly came to this site because of the great railroad facilities that were already established on the southeast side of Wausau. So this was their new factory in 1913. Again, speaking to the influence of Anderson Brothers and Johnson, this was when Mr. William Anderson passed away in 1920. This was his obituary, and it just goes on to say that Mr. Anderson was life is an example of what can be accomplished in America's free soil by the immigrant transplanted here with many handicaps, but with the determined to succeed. The large and successful business of the Granite Company is a testament to his success and encouragement to those like him who wants to come to America. And again, realizing as immigrants coming to America, I think this was I wanted to just feature that little bit of a testimony with regard to Mr. Anderson and his great work with Anderson Brothers and Johnson up in Granite Heights. Later on, and Mr. Gustav Anderson passed away in 1940. This is, living of the Anderson Brothers and Johnson. At least Gustav was still living in Granite Heights when he passed away in 1940. But then eventually, this little community, 1953 to discontinuing the area post office. So that post office that we talked about, well, that went away. The depot went away as the railroad started to discontinue passenger service up and down the line here in Marathon County. That depot disappeared, as well as the post office here in Granite Heights. But there was you can read the little poem at your leisure. But again, it's sort of this little poem, this picnic at Granite Heights, speak to a little bit of the lore of Granite Heights throughout the history of Marathon County. Quite unique, and I think that in the early days of the 20th century, Granite Heights did have a certain, like I said, a little bit of a certain lore that was always with the people, not only in Granite Heights, but with people in Wausau and the rest of Marathon County. Eventually, the bottom note saying that the state mineral was galena, and the Wisconsin state rock is the red granite of Wisconsin. So that was officially declared the official state rock of the state of Wisconsin by the Wisconsin legislature. And this story a little bit later, one bustling Granite Heights, now quiet. Again, testimony to the earlier part of the 20th century, when indeed it was a bustling community, and now quieting down to the community that it is today. So with that, a little bit of there's intertwining stories: the Swedish element, the rock, the red granite, Anderson Brothers and Johnson, the red rock, the red granite spread throughout this vein in northern Marathon County. But again, a little bit of a hint at the story of this little crossroads, this little community tucked away up along the Wisconsin River in Marathon County. So with that, I'll turn it back to Ben.
Yeah, cool. So there you go, Granite Heights. We have one more week left in this month of places you should know. This is going to be the odd one out a little bit. There you go. Where are we? We'll take a look at some slides next week, and see what we can do to determine where is the slide taking place, and just sort of a fun little jaunt through some local history, and maybe learn a little bit about, how do you go about identifying where something is if you don't immediately look at it and go right there, you know? So that's going to be next week. And then starting in March, we'll be returning to a familiar theme, but we'll get there when we get there. Before we go, though, I should also let you know, if you're not already aware, this Saturday, we have our first History Speaks of 2024, which is about the Krieger shootout, which is a very fascinating little moment in time in World War One in central Wisconsin, about the Krieger brothers, who were accused of being draft dodgers and murderers, and there's a whole shootout that takes place around this. It's a fascinating story, and we're joined by Lee from Colby, who is going to be telling us all about that. So that's a free event this Saturday at 2 p.m. here at the Woodson History Center at the Historical Society. Yeah, I hope you come join us for that if you're able. But with that, I think we will call it there. Thanks so much for watching. Hope you have a wonderful rest of the day. We'll be back with more history chats next week, again next Thursday. And in the meantime, have a wonderful rest